It is? Okay. First, I want to thank everyone for coming here for the third and final event of the week of National Days of Remembrance and Genocide Awareness. On Tuesday, we had a Days of Remembrance where, in partnership with World Without Genocide, we actually heard the stories of Holocaust survivors, victims, heroes, and perpetrators of genocides and the Holocaust around the world. It was an amazing story on Tuesday. On Thursday, we had an event here talking about the genocides in Congo and Rwanda. Also well received, excellent. Today is our third day, remembering also Days of Remembrance. We'll be having speakers and we'll be having the mayor. Before we start, I just wanted to say I'm very proud to be living in Edina, to have an event like this. I am also a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. My family's Holocaust survivors, and obviously some that didn't. So it's important for all of us to understand the injustices that have been done, to understand the impact that it has with people, and also to make a difference going forward. So thank you all for coming. And I'd like to introduce Mayor Hovland next.
Thanks, Jen. All right. First of all, I'd like to give a congratulatory piece of applause to our Human Rights and Relations Commission, and Jan is part of that organization. This is, I think, the third year that we have done this. I don't know why we're the only city in the metro that's recognizing these days of remembrance on a national basis and adopting it locally. But maybe we will be able to be the community that gets everybody else thinking about it, so that other folks around the metropolitan area, all these communities, and I'll mention it tomorrow at the Regional Council of Mayors meeting, when you see this little pin that Ellen Kennedy gave me that says Zahor in Hebrew, that means remember. And so I wear this, I've been wearing it all week. Thank you for giving it to me on Tuesday. And it is something that I will wear, I think, more frequently than just during this National Days of Remembrance week that we do every year right around Passover time. So we have a real interesting program this afternoon. We've got Fred Amram with us, who is a survivor. That makes me think of liberators as well. Jean Silvestri, I saw Jean come in. Where's Jean? Here. This is a gentleman from our community that helped liberate one of the camps during World War II, Jean Silvestri. Thank you, Jean. And do we have some other survivors here other than Fred? I thought someone told me there were a few others.
We do have a few survivors, and at the end of our event, we'll have people in the lobby that can answer some questions. But at the moment, we do have over here, we have Dora Iger, Zeidenweber, and we have her son, Gary. I know the daughter, Roseanne, is over there. Okay, and we had Risa, and her husband, also Holocaust survivors. So I don't know if there's anybody else in the audience that are Holocaust survivors.
I want to be sure that Bill Duna is recognized. Where's Bill?
Bill.
Oh.
Bill Duna is a Roma, and the Roma, like the Jews, were targeted during the Holocaust. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming. So many of you remember, I think, that have an keen interest in history, that it was November 9th and 10th, 1938, when the events occurred that became known as Kristallnacht in Germany, the night of broken glass. Over 1,000 Jewish synagogues attacked and ravaged in that two-day period. Over 7,000 Jewish businesses ravaged as well. 90-some people, Jewish people, killed, and over 30,000 taken prisoner, I suppose, arrested, if you will, and shipped off to concentration camps. Fred is going to tell us a little bit about his experience during that period of time when he was just a young boy. And so we really welcome, we are so pleased that you were here, Fred. He's a retired professor of communications and creativity at the University of Minnesota. So welcome, Fred Amram.
I assume that the applause is...
If you can use that.
Oh, I have, I'm
all
hooked
fired
up, yeah. Uh, I'm, I'm assuming that your applause is for Mayor Hovland. I just came back recently from Massachusetts, and I was telling folks there, as I was trying to rile up the troops to work on human rights issues, about what Edina was doing. And wherever I went, they said, Edina? And the stereotype of Edina is not at all what Edina has done in being an incredible leader in Minnesota, if not nationally, as a city. And you really should honor the mayor and his council. It's just wonderful. The picture you see on the screen is the picture of the synagogue at which I worshiped when I was young. It's in Hanover, Germany, where I was born. And that synagogue was one of the 1,000 that were burned that Mayor Hovland referred to. I watched from our 4th floor balcony as the flames came out of the broken glass, out of the spaces left by the broken windows. That particular synagogue, built in 1870, you can see a magnificent structure, was totally destroyed. The night of broken glass, November 9th, 1938, my father disappeared. And my mother and I were really worried. After all, where could he have gone? He could have been arrested. He could be in hiding. He could be dead. We didn't know. Well, Papa came home really late that night, and he was carrying a large package. And the package was wrapped in blankets. And I rather hoped that it was a baby brother, because I've always wanted one, even now. Papa laid the package down, took off one blanket, took off another blanket, took off a third blanket, and there was a Torah that he had rescued from the synagogue that we just looked at. For those of you who don't know a Torah, who are not of the tribe, a Torah, when opened, carries the 5 books of Moses written by hand by a scribe. They're very valuable. A synagogue that has more than one considers itself wealthy. Well, clearly, during Kristallnacht, Crystal Night, the night of broken glass, almost all the Torahs in Europe were burned. One of the few that was rescued by Papa that night. Well, when Papa unwrapped the Torah, my mother was furious. Why, she said, why would you bring a Torah into this house? We could all be killed. It would be a crime. Why would you bring a Torah into an apartment where not even radios are permitted? What do radios have to do with Torahs? Well, just a few days before, the Gestapo had been to our house and at gunpoint had demanded to search the house, my mother and I cowering in a corner. They wanted our radios, Jews will not own radios. Well, my mother explained that we only owned one, but they searched the entire house, and lo and behold, we only had one radio, and they took it, of course, and left with the apartment pretty well destroyed and with a Heil Hitler. Well, that was Kristallnacht for me. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, is known because, as Mayor Hovland suggested, some 7,000 shops were destroyed. Here you see a picture of one. Looting went on indiscriminately, was encouraged, in fact, by see, when I was at the university, I would promise a grade of F to anybody who had a cell phone.
Where we come from, we promise to start over again.
Ah.
Hear any phones.
7,000 stores were looted, and looting was encouraged indeed by the police, by the Gestapo, by the SS. Jews were hauled out of their apartments and forced to scrub the streets on their hands and knees. And I watched this from my fourth floor balcony. Sometimes, in some areas, Jews were forced to scrub the streets with their own toothbrushes. This is a most remarkable picture, and I want you to study it carefully. We're going to come back to it in a little while and talk about it some more. Now, when did the Holocaust begin? Some people suggest that it began on Kristallnacht, on November 8th, 1939. Not for me, it didn't. The Holocaust began way, way sooner. Let me give you just a tad of history. On January 30th of 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. In April of 1933, Hitler created new laws forbidding kosher food. Hitler asked all Germans to boycott Jewish-owned merchants. This is just 3.5 months after he became Chancellor. In September of 1933, a Jewish child was born in a Catholic infant's home. Why would a Jewish child be born in a Catholic infant's home? Because at that time, it was already forbidden, at least in Hanover, for Jews to use public hospitals, and the Jewish hospital had already been closed. There was an order of nuns, and unfortunately, I can't tell you the name of the order, that decided to be upstanders, that is, to stand up to Hitler. There was an order of nuns that said, we will take Jewish women when they deliver babies. And there you see that Jewish child in September of 1933, not many months after Hitler became Chancellor, and 5 years before Kristallnacht. Isn't that remarkable? Yes, I'm that baby. You guessed that. And isn't it cute? You probably recognize me. And yes, that's my mother. Well, by April of 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed. The Nuremberg laws, we've just skipped 2 years. Things have been happening in between, but we don't want to keep you here for a few days. But the Nuremberg laws suggested that Jews and Gentiles could not marry one another. Civil rights of all Jews was taken away. That means Jews were no longer citizens of Germany. That meant that Jews could not work in the civil service. Jews could not teach in the public schools. When you think of the Holocaust, you think of Auschwitz, you think of skeletons, you think of barbed wire fences. Auschwitz sneaks up on us. I'm here to tell you that there are a lot of things that happen before the concentration camps. And that's an important lesson, I think, as we think about other events in the United States and in the rest of the world. Well, first thing that happens is that they separate us and them and us, whoever they are, and the Hutus and the Tutsis, or whatever country you go to. In any genocide, the history is essentially the same. In Germany, it was the Star of David. I was speaking with Dora a little while ago, and she said, in Poland, in our town, they had an armband with a blue star. In Hanover, we had an armband and a yellow star. It wasn't always the same, but it was always that star. It was always the star. And I want you to think, those of you who haven't had this experience, what would it feel like if you went to Southdale or the Mall of America or to Edina, Byerly's, with a stigma, with somehow knowing that you're different and that everybody knows that you're different? There's a mark. How does that feel? Well, certainly in Edina, if one is African American or any other color than white, you know how that feels. But here's an artificial mark. Them and us. Them and us. Well, that's where it begins. There's a cute little guy again. And that cute little guy is fat and sassy, is eating well. These are the good days, in quotes. You have to understand this is after Jews can't use the public hospitals. This is after the Nuremberg laws. This is after a lot of stuff has happened, and yet we're not in concentration camps yet. Things happen one step after another. Or as one little girl told me one day, it's just one thing after one thing. And really, that's how it happens. So here is little Freddie at Goetheplatz. Street on which I lived was called Goethestrasse, Goethe Street. And at the end of the street, there was a park. And the park was called Goetheplatz. My mother took me there regularly, and I loved it. My mother was a really good whistler. She could whistle almost any song that you like. You just tell her, she could do it. She could whistle with the birds. And what I liked about the park was that she, in fact, seemed to have conversations with the birds. It was just wonderful. Well, one day we came to the park, and one of the benches had a special sign, a sign that hadn't been there before. Nur für Juden, it said, only for Jews. Well, as a youngster, I thought that was the greatest. I get to have my own bench. My mother knew better. The next week, all the other benches said Nur für Arier. We got to have one bench, and they had all the others. And those were the good days when Jews could still use the park, because it wasn't very months later that Jews couldn't go to the park at all. Understand that it's just one thing after another. Auschwitz sneaks up on us. Well, one day on the way home, we noticed that the trolley in front of our house, we had trolley tracks and trolleys ran regularly, and I loved to go with my grandmother on the trolley because she would take me to the zoo or to the countryside, and it was always an adventure. But one day, coming home from the park, where we had only one bench, the trolley car had a new sign, für Juden verboten, to Jews forbidden. That was very sad. That was that was much worse than losing the free reign of the park. I love trolley cars even more than ice cream. And speaking of ice cream, oftentimes when we came home from the park, we would stop at an ice cream shop. If I was a good boy, my mother said. And I was always a good boy. Being a good boy meant holding her hand when we crossed streets and not becoming too rowdy. So one day on the way home, we stopped at an ice cream shop, and the owner, who knew us well because we stopped frequently, sidled up to us and said, "I'm very sorry. We can't serve Jews." This is before Auschwitz. This is before the skeletons. This is before the barbed wire. This is before the images that you're accustomed to seeing. Could things like that happen in the United States? You nod. Indeed, they did. When I came to the United States, I went to Washington, D.C., and saw this picture, white and colored. Hutu and Tutsi, Jew and Aryan. And then came the time when Jews in Germany had to carry an ID card. Had to carry an ID card that identified us as Jews. And indeed, the ID card had a big J on the cover. J for Jude, Jew. At the top of that sign that you see, that ID card, it says Deutsches Reich, German Empire, and at the bottom, Kennkarte, ID card. And there's my mother's. All of us had a picture taken in exactly the same pose, exactly the same direction. On the left side is demographic information, my mother's maiden name, the town in which he was born, birth date. Do you know, for some strange reason, in my family, nobody had a middle name. This is not related to religion, it's not related to wealth or poverty. It just happens that in my family, nobody had a middle name. And suddenly, in about early 1938, all Jews had to take on a middle name. But not any middle name. All women had a middle name of Sarah. If you had a middle name, it was changed to Sarah, unless your middle name already was Sarah. And if you didn't have a middle name, then you had to adopt that middle name on all your papers. All your papers had to be changed, including your birth certificate. And if you were a man, your middle name became Israel. And so my father's middle name was Israel, and my middle name was Israel, and my uncle's middle name was Israel, and the tailor down the street had a middle name of Israel. And, well, there we go. And so my mother's ID card said Sarah. How do you feel when you're treated that way? Well, the next thing that happens to you, and we're on the verge now, is dehumanization. The really bad stuff happens. We've just gone 5 years, and I've given you a few examples of the kinds of things that lead up to the dehumanization. What would you have done? What would you do now if there were some benches in the local park restricted to or against some folks, whoever they might be? What would you be what would you do if some people couldn't go to your schools or teach in your schools? Would you stand by, say, oh, well, it isn't me? Would you be a bystander? Or would you be, as Ellen Kennedy says, an upstander? We've seen this picture. This was a turning point. It was not the beginning of the Holocaust. And that's my message today. But this is a turning point. Up until now, people could have protested. People could have picketed. People could have said, no, we won't stand for this. You can't treat our neighbors in this way. But people didn't, or very few did. Clearly the nuns did, the nuns who assured my healthy birth. Surely the people who used to hide my father when we knew the Gestapo was looking for him, and they would hide my father under their bed. There were some who said no. There were some who said we protest, some who said this is wrong. What would you do? Now, we saw this picture a little while ago, and I asked you to study it. There we see the Jews scrubbing the street, just as I saw them scrubbing the street from my balcony in Hanover, Germany. But there's something else going on here. There's a bunch of folks standing around You might call them gawkers. They're just standing by. They're bystanders. What would you do if you came upon the scene? Would you kneel down and say, I'm one of you? Would you say, no, get up, take off your star, stand with us? What would you do? How would you protest, if you would protest? And by this time, there would be some risk in protesting. Would you stand by, be a bystander? Or would you be an upstander? This is the turning point. This is Kristallnacht. This is the night of broken glass. And then they started taking the men away to slave labor. These are all Jews. One of these people is a doctor, a physician. One of them is an attorney. There are several merchants there. And look how healthy they look. They're not the skeletons that you think of when you think of slave labor. It's one thing after another. Some of them will become corpses. Some of them will become skeletons. Some of them will be behind barbed wire. At this point, they've just been plucked from their homes. And they look healthy, sometimes even muscular. The man in the upper right with the big hair, that's my dad. And then came the real start of World War II. The Germans in 1938 had made the Anschluss with Austria, that is, had invaded Austria, and had started invading Czechoslovakia and other Central European countries, pushing their way around. But on September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. And that began, officially, World War II. Most significantly, the British, at this stage, really worried about themselves, said, no, Hitler, you can't get away with this. You can't expand throughout Europe. It was okay that they took Austria. It was okay that they went into Czechoslovakia. But now, the British were paying attention. Poland was a step too much. And the British started bombing. And they bombed Hanover, Germany. And so every night, the middle of the night, the Royal Air Force, the RAF, would come flying overhead. The air raid sirens would go off, and we would run down to the basement, and there was the air raid shelter, and it was stinky and chilly and damp, but we enjoyed each other's company. We felt secure. Until one day, when the air raid sirens went screaming, we went down to the basement, and there was a new sign. And the sign said, Juden verboten, Jews forbidden. And from then on, we got to watch the RAF airplanes. We got to watch the bombing from our fourth floor window. Sometimes I would hide under a table. And one day I saw my mother crack. She just couldn't take it anymore. Bombs were falling, fires around the city. She went out on the balcony. She shook her fist and she said, God, let the bombs fall on this house. I don't care if it means my death and the death of my family members, as long as all these other people go too. And then she added, if they can't live with the Jews, let them die with the Jews. We've seen the separation, we've seen the dehumanization, and now we get to the atrocities. And that's what you think the Holocaust is. That's what you think any genocide is. But genocide is more than that. Genocide starts somewhere. It starts with you can't use the park. It starts with you can't come to school. It starts with separate water fountains. It starts with, and you can nip it in the bud anywhere along the line. Once you get to the atrocities, you've missed the boat. This is Auschwitz-Birkenau. This is the women's bathroom, so to speak. It's an outhouse. My friend Marilla Newman lives out here in Golden Valley, was in Auschwitz, and used this outhouse. And she says there were 60 slots. Twice a day, we were hauled out in the morning and at night, whether we needed to or not, in packs of 60. We marched to the outhouse, sat back to back. That's the atrocities. That's the gas chamber at Auschwitz, or a gas chamber. This is the inside of the gas chamber. There were no flowers then. Flowers are there now because now it's a memorial. If you look at the far end, you see a door. Where does that door lead? Here you can see through the door, and you see the crematorium. The bodies were hauled out of the gas chamber into the crematorium, and the bodies went up in smoke right there. By then, it's too late to protest. By then, it's too late to become an upstander. When you think of the Holocaust, you think of dead bodies like this. This is the picture you're accustomed to. But this isn't the Holocaust. This picture is Rwanda. Rwanda, almost 1 million people killed in less than 100 days. It's just not quite the 6 million Jews or the 1.5 million Roma or the on and on and on. But there it is. This is Rwanda. This is the Holocaust. This is Bergen-Belsen. 15-minute trolley ride from my home in Hanover. You'll have a chance in a little while to meet Dora, who was introduced just a little while ago, who spent some time here. When Bergen-Belsen was liberated in 1945, 13,000 unburied bodies were found littering the streets. Imagine that. 13,000 bodies were found littering above ground. But when we talk about 6 million, or 1.5 million, or 17 million, or whatever number you have, those are big numbers that have little meaning to us. I want to introduce you to some of those people. My mother was the oldest of 3 girls. The middle one was named Carol, married Jakob Stern, Jacob Stern. Carol was born, my aunt was born, 1911. She died on the 6th of January, 1945, in the Riga ghetto. Aside from the pain of losing an aunt, it's especially sad that she died in January of 45. Had she been able to live 3 more months, she would have been liberated. And I'd have an aunt. Uncle Jacob, he was one of my favorite relatives. I loved him. Although I was yet a boy, not of driving age, he was teaching me to drive. I was a man. And he died in the Riga ghetto. I haven't found the exact date yet. Jette Amram is my paternal grandmother. Jette is a German variation of Henrietta. On the 1st of December of 1941, a cattle train with 101 Jews left Hanover, Germany, and traveled to the Riga ghetto. My grandmother was one of those 101 Jews. This is the grandmother who took me on the trolley to the zoo and to the countryside. She died sometime in December of 1941, again in the Riga ghetto. I don't know the exact date. I know she left Hanover on the 1st of December, and she either died on the train or she died immediately after she arrived at the ghetto in a couple of days, or she lived a few more days after that. But she died in December of 41 at the age of 70. My mother was the oldest of 3 girls. You've met the middle sister. The youngest sister, Kate, I don't have her picture, married Isaac Worms in Amsterdam, Holland. a Dutchman. And she moved to Amsterdam, Holland, and there she had a baby named Altje. Altje was born on the 21st of August, 1939. Note that Holland was still free, and indeed there was absolutely no expectation that anything would happen to Holland or Belgium and we go on and on. But it turned out that I met Altje only once. At the very end of 1939, I was in Amsterdam, and I played with my only first cousin Altje, who obviously was an infant at the time. I can't say we played Monopoly or that we wrestled on the floor. But that was Altje. But then the Germans, the Nazis, parachuted into Holland. And what happened to the Dutch Jews is exactly what happened to the German Jews and the Polish Jews. And so Altje, with her mother, walked into the Auschwitz gas chamber on the 19th of February, 1943, at the age of 3.5. Her father, Isaac, died in Auschwitz 3 months later. I just found that out recently. We keep trying, don't we, to find our heritage. Death isn't the only outcome of genocide. One of the outcomes of genocide is refugees. Refugees means people who leave their home unwillingly but to save their lives. Here in Minnesota, we have a zillion and one Somali refugees, we have Hmong, we have so many who've come here not because they want to, but because they have to. Now, I want to tell you an interesting story about my family and the refugee experience. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was one of 6 children. Her brother was Sebald. One of her brothers was Sebald, the man you see in this picture. He married Laura. They had 2 children, Susanna and Norman. After Kristallnacht, after the night of broken glass, it was pretty clear that Jews were not going to survive very long. The British started a Kindertransport, which said that some children could be transported to England to either live in orphanages or in foster homes. Not many, just a few thousand. So a few thousand children were selected to go to England to be rescued. The Miller family had the offer of sending 1 child on the Kindertransport. Now imagine that. You have 2 children, you can send 1 on the Kindertransport. Which one will you send? Well, as it turned out, this family picked Norman and said he could go. And so you see some tough experiences First of all, you have Norman, who's leaving his family at the age of 15 with nothing but a little suitcase and a tag around his neck that says, "My name is," and "My birth date is." The other half of that equation is that these parents are letting him go not knowing if they will ever see him again. And as it turns out, they never saw him again, because Sebald and Laura and Susanna all died in death camps. Norman did survive. Norman became a refugee. I have 1,000 stories, as do all of the survivors who are here tonight. Some of my stories have been published, and you can read them on my website. Feel free to look me up. You can even see some pictures. Ellen Kennedy from World Without Genocide, and you certainly want to sign up with them today if you're not a member yet. Ellen Kennedy talks about enough moments. An enough moment is that moment when you say, "I've had enough. I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something." Now, if you haven't had an enough moment, then let my experience be your enough moment. Let Altje Worms be your enough moment. My cousin Altje was stripped of her clothing and with her mommy walked into that gas chamber. And then her body went into that crematorium, and all that was left was the ashes and the smoke. Let that be an enough moment.